Welcome back to more SOVL PvP. It's been a while. I've taken a bit of a break from the game for the last month or so, but it's very exciting to be back because we're back with the inaugural SOVL Discord Cup. Now this is a tournament being organised by Subspace over on the official SOVL Discord. It's a 500 point best of 3 tournament. If you want to check this out or check out any future tournaments, because I know there are plans to do more, head on over to the official SOVL Discord, link in the description. So at the time of recording, I've just got a few more days to submit my list, and I thought what we would do today is, go through my decision process for what list to bring. Now, I know this is all just for fun and I don't want to take it too seriously, but in situations like this, it's always good to think about the meta and think about what kind of list you might be going up against. Challenge here, though, is I think the SOVL meta is still very open. There are a few lists and things that come to mind when I think about what is strong right now. So I'm thinking about things like Goblin, Spam, Greenskin lists. Various flavors of Goatmen, and Goatmen have tended to do well with previous tournaments. I think the tank has elevated Empire slightly. Likewise, I think Dragon Knights and the new command ability for Conclave have improved them. I think the ranged Flea, Deepwood, all-in sort of list can be very lethal in the right situations and in the right hands. The champion for Abyssal and either the Doombell or long rifles for Ratkin are still really strong and I think worth building around. I think Dwarves and Reptilian Kingdoms are just super solid all round. I really like both the kind of all-in Vampire, Death Star lists and also the go-wide Necromancer lists for Undead. So yeah, basically I think the list of things that are really strong is quite long and varied, which makes it kind of difficult to plan against. But there's also another consideration that we noted when Total Fuzzy Logic and I reviewed all of the list submissions for the recent Pula Brav tournament in my last video. If you haven't seen that, go ahead and check that out. And that is that for a tournament, people are maybe a bit more likely to revert to something tried and tested rather than play something a bit more left field. One aspect of that is people will tend to play factions that they are personally very familiar with. And then another factor, I think, is that lists might skew a bit more towards the kind of safer jack of all trades that have a good or some game against all comers, rather than the more extreme all-in on one strategy lists that are a bit more matchup dependent. So in that vein, you might expect to see a bit more of things like Empire, maybe Greenskins. I think Lizards play that jack of all trades game really well, although are a bit more uncommon, rather than things like the kind of Deepwood all-in range list that I mentioned before. I think the other thing that I'm personally thinking about a lot for this tournament is the impact of fleeing, because I still feel like fleeing is a kind of tricky mechanic that is more powerful in the hands of better or more experienced players. So some questions that I'm asking myself are, can my list either use flee itself to gain an advantage, but also does it have the volume of units and or the speed to kind of limit my opponent's ability to use fleeing to their advantage? So where does that leave us? I think, the meta, as I say, is wide open, and in trying to maybe anticipate and counter the meta, you're maybe more likely to end up just tripping over yourself. So, I'm just really thinking about lists that A, I think are strong, B, that I'm personally quite familiar with, and C, because as I said, I don't want to take this too seriously, lists that I think I will have fun playing. So with that in mind, I think I've narrowed it down to 3 potential lists from 3 different factions, them being Goatmen, Ratkin, and Lizards. So yeah, I present to you the highly subjective Battle of the Beasts. First up for your consideration is the faction that I've played by far the most games with, and that is Goatmen. I've played various iterations of Goatmen, but the style that I've kind of gravitated to a bit more recently has definitely been this double Minotaur list. Now, why double Minos? If you were to oversimplify SOVL, I think you can boil it down to you win games by winning more combats than your opponent. And the Route 1 way of doing that is by simply having a stronger unit than your opponents. And, with their power 5, 4 attacks with Frenzy, there are very few things that stand toe-to-toe with a unit of Minotaurs in a fair fight. One of the other ways that you win combat, though, because obviously if it just came down to the strength of the unit, it would be a pretty boring game, almost like an auto battle or something. The other way is by setting up favorable engagements by using mobility to get into flanking, things like that. And to that end, this list also does well. In fact, I've talked at length about the benefits of having 6 or more units to play the positioning game. And aside from the Goatmen, at least in this iteration, every unit in this list is fairly speedy. Now, the kind of other way, I suppose, that you win combats is something this list doesn't do, which is reduce the effectiveness of your opponent's units through either shooting abilities or spells, and this kind of has none of that. But let's talk about running specifically 2 units of 3 Minotaurs. I saw a comment a little while ago favouring the idea of 1 big unit of 4 Minotaurs because they said it's easier to kind of screen them from your opponent's shooting and things like that. But at least in the way that I play this list, I'm not interested in kind of delaying the game or wasting time screening my Minotaur units. I want to get up in their face as quickly as possible. Who cares about opponents shooting when their shooting units are already dead? And that is why I like this particular configuration with the 2 chariots with their ambusher ability. Just get right up in your opponent's face in turn 1. And then, as I said, lots of kind of speedy things. Quite often, obviously, one of the things that Minotaurs are most susceptible to is the lethal shots abilities on things like cannons. But chariots are also susceptible to that. And if you have these chariots in your face, then it's kind of overwhelming your opponent with lots of valid targets. Go through the list just specifically. I have, this iteration at least, vitality on the Lord because there are 15 points left over with everything else. I think 2-hand weapons bumping the normal guys from 3 to 4 attacks, but then the great weapon keeping who already has 4 attacks on the commander to have that extra punch against other commanders. I think this is the kind of better configuration, at least mathematically. But Goatman warriors are just filling the battle line role, and then 1 unit of hounds, 2 units of chariots, and the final unit of Minotaurs with 2-hand weapons. There is a slightly different configuration, which I'll just show you now, that allows the warriors to be upgraded to Mongol pack, and I do think it is an upgrade. It means you don't have the points for vitality, and because there is then a 5-point difference remaining, you have to switch out one of the chariots for a second unit of hounds. So this is the other sort of configuration that I'm debating. I think the Mongol pack are really good at objective play. They can set up in ambush, and then you can move them forward to cover the front of an objective, which is really good at securing objective from turn 1 against, even things like elves or units with swift, which themselves can usually get onto objectives turn 1 as well. Don't have the vitality on the commander, which is not a huge deal, but I really like the second chariot, and it allows you to do some kind of sneaky, sort of somewhat annoying things. Sometimes you often want to just play the usual game with kind of many speedy units of going wide and trying to get around the flanks, that kind of thing, limiting their movement. What you can also do, which is really annoying, is deploy them really far forward and move them immediately right up into your opponent's face, blocking their movement. Then your opponent has the choice to either, well, they don't really want to ignore them, because then you can just leave them there, stick them around for the next turn. If they do charge them, depending on the situation, you might either want to retreat them, or even if you countercharge, often just sacrificing that unit, it will spin your opponent's unit, making their flank vulnerable, because you can then follow with the Minotaur units and often get, a really good charge, either if you because of the flee, or because that unit has kind of been spun around. So in either case, what are some of the strengths of these double Minotaur lists? Well, it's definitely very punchy, and especially with its two almost like must-kill threats in both units of Minotaurs. If one goes down, you've still got the other one. In general, having the 6 units and a lot of speed means you can just really pressure your opponent. And because you can kind of back them into their side of the board, it's pretty good as well at pressuring objectives from as early as turn 1, so it can play the objective game well. In terms of weaknesses of this list, it is vulnerable to very heavy shooting, particularly with the kind of multi-wound Minotaurs being vulnerable to lethal shots. It has no shooting to speak of, no spells, abilities, things like that. So in order to kill your opponent, you're going to have to chase them down, and might be a bit susceptible to the kind of kiting, fleeing sort of thing. And it's very all in that sort of way. It needs to get up in your opponent's face. It's a pure melee combat army. And particularly in a tournament setting where your opponent is going to know your list going into it, they're maybe going to be able to deploy accordingly, knowing that is coming. I should mention, as a strength for this list, is out of the 3 lists I'm going to talk about today, this is the one that I by far have the most games with. And I think that really just helps with having an intuitive sense when you send a unit into your opponent's unit, kind of who's going to win that combat. I think that's the main way that benefits you. Moving on, next contender for the Battle of the Beasts is going to be the Rats. And we're going here with the tried and tested Doombell plus Hex of Ruin. If you're not familiar with this, the Doombell ability allows all of your units to have Frenzy for 1 turn, once per battle. And then you combine that with Hex of Ruin from the Warlock, and you can take out pretty much anything. It kind of sets up this like one big sort of mega turn of combat, where even your kind of puniest conscripts or Ratkin slingers with skill 3, power 3 can take down pretty much anything. To that end, you kind of really just want to pair this with lots of bodies. We talked about this, Fuzzy Logic and I, in my previous video at one point, but the other unit that I think can be really strong for Ratkin are the long rifles, just because of their lethal shots ability combined with their ability like move, ducking and cover, things like that. But I think you want to kind of go all in on one or the other strategies rather than trying to split the difference personally. So that's why, as a range support here, I've gone for the slingers, just get more bodies, not expecting to do a whole lot with their ranged attack, but yeah, you just want to get as many bodies into combat as possible for that one big frenzy turn. No other spells on the Warlock, pretty vulnerable enough as it is, or important enough as it is. Legionaries are a really nice unit. I think both the Doombell and the Legionaries saw points increases. As I kind of mentioned, this is a strategy that's been around for a while. It did receive some nerfs, but I think it's still kind of just as strong. And then, yeah, conscripts, slingers, just there for more bodies. And the skulkers are really nice with their ambusher ability to just help you tag objectives. And actually with their 2 attacks each as well, they can really dish out the damage, although only 10 models, pretty vulnerable to shooting themselves. So let's say only 5 units in this one, and this army really wants to kind of move up together, protect those flanks, move up as one, get into combat as one to set up that one big combat turn. Now, it's been a while since I've played with this list, but at one point I was playing it a lot and actually had like a really successful run that took me all the way up to into the top 10. But as I say, it has been a little while. Some strengths of the list are obviously the sort of disgusting combat potential with that one turn with the Doombell ability, plus if you combine it with Hex of Ruin, it's got quite a lot of bodies, which is just nice for your opponent to chew through. And because it does want to kind of move up as one big block, it can play one objective quite well. Contrast as one of the weaknesses, it kind of doesn't really want to be like spread out, so doesn't play two objectives so well. The Doombell really must survive, so you kind of need it to be completely out of the game and then once it's going to use its abilities, then you can kind of charge it in, things like that. But yeah, the Doombell really needs to survive. Bit vulnerable to assassins. It's quite slow. Everything's pretty much kind of walking speed, even with the Swift on a couple of units, and that makes it a little bit vulnerable too. Doesn't play the flee game particularly well, and as well, again, with this being like open lists, people are going to expect it, know about it, and that one sort of big mega turn can be played around. I think the best way to combat this list is to try and sort of drip feed your units in so your opponent doesn't have one obvious opportunity to use that Doombell ability. And finally, for your consideration, although really it's just for my consideration because I'll be deciding, but in the Battle of Beasts, it is the Lizards. And this is a faction that I've definitely not played as much. However, I do think they are well positioned right now. I think they can be really strong, particularly with their kind of combination of movement and high bravery. That means they play the flee game particularly well. Fairly good discipline across the board, and aside from the jungle swarm here, everything's moving fairly speedily, and yeah, good mix of units, good number of threats, allows you to get the 6 units in here. I'm not 100% sure on the configuration though, but this is kind of what I've landed on. As I say, I'm not so experienced, so some of this is going to be from borrowing from other players, as we should all do, but I've gone with the Warlord. I do think the Warlock is a good consideration. Doesn't have access to Hex of Ruin, but does have Primal Fury, which in most cases can do the same job. But I've gone for the Warlord on the T-Rex. Naked, I don't think it needs any of the weapon or item enchantments in order to do its job. I think it's kind of punchy enough with a pretty good stat line from the T-Rex, and combined with a nice bit of kind of utility with the war cry. Another nice thing about it is, even though it's that sort of chariot formation, if it gets flanked, it can still put out the majority of its damage output, even if your opponent has kind of flanked it. For battle line, 16 Braves with Javelins. I do think it's justifiable sometimes to play these Braves without the Javelins, either if you just want a really cheap battle line fulfillment, or also I think they can they've got a similar stat line, can fulfill the role of Goblins, and you just want cheap numbers of them. But I've gone for the Javelins here. I think combination of that small amount of shooting with the Fire Lizard can help pick something off, or even just weaken your opponent's unit before charging into it. Speaking of the Fire Lizard, I think this is almost auto-include for Lizards. At only 5 wounds, it's a little bit vulnerable to shooting, things like that, but it's only 60 points. And yeah, it's a weird unit. It just kind of doesn't operate like most other units in the game, simply because it's almost like an artillery piece that's got slightly shorter range, but really high movement. And a better profile for melee combat as well. So yeah, nice little piece. Not entirely sure I know exactly the best ways to use it. I like the 1 unit of pterodactyls. Really for that, traditionally the high speed plus the flying, allowing you to just go hunting for artillery pieces, things like that, getting into the flanks. But also it's really good at playing the kind of flee game on both sides. They're high speed, meaning they're almost always going to have the range to flee out from your opponent's charge, while simultaneously meaning it's easier to set up those situations where your opponent wants to flee but they don't have the movement ability to do so. The Croc Bruisers is a second battle line choice. This is, I think, maybe one of the areas of the list I'm least sure about. I've included them here for the 90 points for just another sort of choppy multi-wound combat threat. I'm not sure if they'll be better served with more Braves or not. But rounding out the list anyway is the Jungle Swarm, and I have been converted. I am a Jungle Swarm believer. When I first saw these, I thought they were a bit underwhelming, sort of slightly unique stat line. I didn't think that they would be able to take the place of the Triceratops, which you see quite a lot in Lizardmen lists. And they're both competing for the one jungle beast slot that you get. But they are much cheaper and do a very similar job. The Triceratops was usually there just to stick around. And a combination of 5 wounds each with 10 discipline and fearless means that often you get the Jungle Swarm into your opponent's unit and it just doesn't go anywhere. In addition, though, the high number of attacks, 15 starting at 15 attacks with the 3 models, even though, low skill, low power, means that they are naturally suited against units with a lower number of wounds but high defense, where you just want a volume of attacks to kind of chew through them. So things like giants. So things I like about the list, I like that it has a lot of threats. It has those 6 units. It's got a little bit of shooting here and there, and really that kind of ability to play the flee game with the relatively high discipline and good mobility. The biggest downside to me playing this list is the sort of just lack of experience. I haven't played this list or Reptilian Kingdoms all that much, and also the kind of flip side to that jack of all trades that talked about is it doesn't really excel in any one area either. So let me know what you think. Are you team goat? Are you team rat or team lizard? At this point, I can genuinely say that I have not made up my mind. Maybe I'll kind of put it to a vote that you guys decide, although thinking about the time frame when this will go out, might not have time because I need to submit the list soon, so I might have to just decide myself. Either way, hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think about these lists in general. Let me know what you're taking or what you think I should take if you're not taking part in the tournament. As always, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Do check out the SOVL Discord link in the description. If you want more information on these tournaments, check out all the other SOVL PvP content creators that link to in the description as well. And until next time, I hope you're having a great day. Bye bye.